Since the dawn of time, men and women have been exchanging what they have enough of against what they need, goods and services alike. This is what we call trade. It appeared long before money was invented. At the time, it was known as barter. Even small children trade. Since time immemorial, trade has enabled individuals and communities to live more comfortably. In a Quechua community in the forests of Ecuador, a blind man has learned to imitate the cries of jungle animals to perfection. He helps hunters by attracting the prey and receives a share in exchange. He's selling a service, and by doing so is able to meet his needs. Human beings everywhere, from the countryside to the most modern cities, are doing the same. They're selling what they can do best or cheaper, and what they get in return helps them to live better. For a long time, trade has been international. Flint tools have been found thousands of miles away from where they were made, not to mention silk and spices, which travelled across 2 continents. Obviously, disagreements will arise from time to time on the terms of trade, and each country has its own laws by which to settle them peacefully. When trade is international, however, and international trade has existed as long as there have been borders, it requires international laws. This is where the WTO comes in. It was created to establish the rules of international trade for the purpose of enhancing human prosperity throughout the world and settling disputes between nations before they degenerated into wars. Taking this computer apart illustrates the interdependence of all countries nowadays. The plastic was manufactured using oil from the Middle East or Latin America. The gold of the electronic circuits comes from Africa or Colombia. The components were assembled in Asia. The design and software are patented in Europe or the United States. The computer code was written by Indian programmers. The same applies to cars and washing machines. My imports are your exports, and vice versa. Trade must be balanced and fair, if only to ensure that your partner can keep paying for your products. By closing its borders to imports, a country merely encourages its partners to do the same. It ends up affecting its own exports and creating unemployment among the very workers it was trying to protect. This is what happened in 1929. Alarmed by the crisis, governments closed their borders in an attempt to protect their workers and their markets, creating a vicious circle. No country can produce everything it needs on its own, and every country needs foreign outlets to sell what it produces. The 1929 crisis, which essentially began as a financial crisis, turned into the Great Depression, with the combination of mass unemployment and national rivalries, aggravated by protectionism. The Second World War followed. The General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, the GATT, was brought into force in 1948. It provided a backdrop for the regulation of trade between the 23 nations that signed it. Countries as large as Canada and as small as Cuba agreed on basic principles for the progressive reopening of their economies according to simple principles. Non-discrimination among trade partners, transparency, a voice for all countries in shaping the rules. Half a century later, the Uruguay Round led to the creation of a new international organization, the WTO. In Marrakesh, 120 governments decided to extend these basic rules beyond the realm of trade in goods. Today, the WTO also manages trade in services and intellectual property, and its rules cover trade in agricultural products and clothing as well. The WTO acts as a mediator for the settlement of disputes and regulates trade with a view to sustainable development. Today, more than $15 trillion worth of goods cross borders each year, nearly $2 billion per hour. And these trillions of dollars worth of goods and services move about easily because the trading partners speak the same language and treat products and services from abroad according to common rules developed by the World Trade Organization. All of this is rather complex. Because of that, the WTO sometimes attracts sharp criticism. In Seattle in 1999, members failed to agree on what they wanted from trade in the 21st century. Meanwhile, outside, demonstrators accused the WTO of threatening the environment, causing job losses and harming the developing countries. In reality, agricultural exports generate employment and income and help to alleviate poverty in the poorest countries. The integration of world supply chains helps developing countries to combat poverty. China alone has been able to raise the living standards of hundreds of millions of people. The Doha Round, launched in Qatar in 2001, aims to improve access to markets in developed countries and reduce the agricultural subsidies which are distorting free competition among the different nations. Developing countries and certain NGOs like Oxfam consider it to be an essential tool for improving their economies. Balancing trade and providing a level playing field remain the WTO's fundamental task. Every year, dozens of officials from developing countries are trained at special WTO seminars so that they can help their countries to reap the benefits of world trade. The idea is that businessmen, entrepreneurs and farmers should be able to work on an equal footing throughout the world. However, because the starting point differs so much from country to country, a number of accompanying measures are required, both in the rich countries and the developing countries, to help absorb the shock caused by certain changes. These disruptions are nothing new. They were around long before the modern world. When Portuguese ships arrived in Asia to open up the maritime route for silk and spices, they spelled the ruin of dozens of prestigious cities along the land route from Samarkand to Venice. Progress inevitably causes such disruptions, and part of the WTO's role is to take this into account. The WTO has learnt that it has to do a better job of explaining the benefits of trade and its positive impact on the developing countries, while at the same time working more closely with civil society. Every year, 2,000 participants in the WTO Public Forum meet to discuss the role of trade in people's lives. Critics and supporters of trade alike have the opportunity to exchange their views. But still today, the WTO remains a mystery for some. Many are not aware, for example, that WTO rules allow governments to protect the environment and public health. Besides, the WTO is nothing without its members, i.e. the governments of the world. Unlike the United Nations, where only 5 countries have the right of veto, every WTO member, however large or small, has the same rights and must approve all important decisions. It's the General Council, which includes all members, that leads the organisation's activities. Members negotiate, settle their disputes, and examine and monitor on a permanent basis the measures taken by each one of them. It's a member-driven organisation. Trade brings people together. It fosters the most efficient use of resources and alleviates one source of tension between people. Countries want to export what they do best, while offering the world to their consumers. But the world also needs a place where sustainable and coordinated development can be promoted, so that growth does not exhaust the planet. The WTO was created to achieve those complex objectives through a set of rules developed by all and for all. A true foundation for our global and ever-changing world, with its epicentre in Geneva.